So very happy to be here with our return guest, Mark Hurd. I wouldn't bother with that chair.
Okay,
And
thank you.
those of you who've been to FiRe before know exactly what we're about to do, which is the famous walking interview. Mark loves to be on a scene.
I'm sorry for
No,
that.
you made us famous.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm really pleased to have you with us.
Thanks.
I know it's been tough. I want to explain to everybody ahead of time that you're in your quiet period.
Well, I'm talking, but we're in our financial
quiet period,
where we're about to close our quarter, and given the ruminations of the financial markets, if I were to say something that would indicate anything, we could have a problem. So I just won't do that.
Right. We just had the CIA here, and someone asked them, "Well, how are you doing?" And they said, "We're not going to tell you that."
Yeah, well, I'm not like them, but I'm not talking about our financials.
So anyway, I want to thank you doubly because I recognize that it's a task to do this during that time period, and you've made the effort. So we're doubly appreciative to have you here.
Glad to be here.
I will not ask you any of those questions.
Thank you, Mark.
And I'm looking forward to finding out a lot about what you've learned since, we've talked to you twice now, I guess, since your move. And so the first question for me is, I've watched from afar as you've come into the organization of Oracle, all the background you brought from NCR and from HP, and kind of in the wake of the Sun acquisition, and with the evolution of the cloud, which we'll come back to in a minute. As we were talking on the phone the other day, this whole thing of the power of integration, you kind of launched passionately and telling me all the stuff you were doing with all these different bits, and it just struck me that it fit perfectly into this theme of integrating all this stuff together. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with that and ask you, how do you see and describe integration at Oracle?
I'd probably start from the top as we talked. I mean, worldwide GDP, $55 trillion. So a lot of commerce going on all around the planet. IT is about 1.8 trillion of that. It's the first time really as I told you, in my life, that consumer has been bigger than companies.
Yeah.
So I think it's sort of a shocking development, particularly for us guys that have been doing this for a long time. Secondly, within the enterprise spend, which is about 850 billion of it, services is now bigger than products, which is another phenomena that's sort of unique, I think, during our lifetime. And it brought me to this point that you were on about this integration thing. And I think we've been effective as an industry, and I certainly claim my role in it, of really making this stuff really hard, particularly for companies. We sell them piece parts. I use the example to you of, if you're in our industry, you wouldn't, though, buy a car from us. You wouldn't get a mirror and a piston and a carburetor and put it in your driveway and, hire Accenture to put it together for you, and then tell you couldn't drive it part of the time and, all that kind of stuff. So, but that's what we do. We sell you a server, an operating system, a database, middleware, applications, in various configurations. Don't pre-integrate, pre-test, and companies put those together on their budget. It's their cost. Whether they outsource it, contract it, or have it on their IT budget. And, I use the example, I won't use names, but if you took the R&D of Oracle, which is big, we're going to spend in a ballpark of $5 billion on R&D, big number. You took the R&D of another really big enterprise company. It may have 3 letters. I can't remember the name, but they're big, like us. And you added those two numbers together, and you said, "Listen, I'm going to take those two numbers, and you're going to get $10 billion plus." And said, "Is that number bigger than one of the 2 or 3 biggest banks in the country's IT budget?" The answer is no. The bank's IT budget is bigger than the R&D of the 2 big enterprises together. I'm comparing apples and oranges to some degree, but the sheer magnitude of the complexity of what we're dealing with is really overwhelming. It has so many implications, Mark, because IT budgets over the next several years, the way we forecast them, they're not going to grow 10%. You know, hopefully they do. But if you look in this country alone, you know, the average application is 22, 23 years old. Budgets are flat, 1%, 2% growth. And yet CEOs have big ideas, you know. You heard this thing about India. Let's go global. Let's get to all those buyers. Let's get an e-commerce strategy. Let's get a mobility strategy. 2 hours later, next meeting on budget, no money. And yet I've got this incredibly complicated infrastructure with this big build today, and I have this lack of integration. So I think this leads into a lot of this noise in the industry about cloud, to your point, and engineered systems, and why is all this stuff so popular? And I think it has its roots in this sort of strategic conundrum we find ourselves in.
Right. So when you look at integration at Oracle, I think this is kind of, we're both old enough, unfortunately, to remember the cycles, you know, and it reminds me an awful lot of almost the same scenario and sales pitch that you might have seen 30 years ago, where vertical integration was, you know, in style, and I think we're coming back to that again. Right. Is that a
that was a speech? Okay. Actually,
when we look at hardware and software from Oracle and the operating system,
I mean,
all this stuff.
For the sake of not making a shameless product pitch, I think in the industry, if I was a customer, I would be rebelling against complexity. I would be saying, listen, give me simple. And I think why I always got a kick when people would tell me, it took me a while to figure out this cloud thing, to be very blunt. A couple years ago, people said, cloud.
I do recall.
And I'd be like, what, cloud? What?
We have it on tape somewhere.
You know, tell me what this means, this cloud. Because you're talking about the physical location of a computer. It's just not that relevant a dialogue about the physical location of the computer and the delivery architecture you choose by which to get your IP. But if you think about how companies are run, you know, you got a company with a strategy and a business model and a business process, and that leads in the end to an application and the automation of that process. If you as a company are willing to standardize that process around a standard approach, cloud becomes very attractive. But cloud's attractive not just because of the delivery architecture, not just because it's CapEx to operating expense. It's attractive because it's simple. Somebody else makes a decision on the box, on the OS, on the database, on the app, and the app is standard. You get what I got.
And security.
It's secure, I protect it, I patch it, I integrate it, I warrant it, I support it. I do all the work. You use it. I think it's the same thing you hear this engineered system. You're going to hear this thing, Oracle talking all the time. We talk about exit data. This thing is like the iPad of the enterprise. Everything integrated together. Server, storage, software, all pre-tested, provisioned by us. And I think the excitement about that is the same point about the cloud. It's done for you. It's tested for you. It's prepared, provisioned for you.
I think that you and Larry have done what Wayne Gretzky talks about.
Oh, this could be good.
You know what I mean?
I'd love to hear it.
Well, he always says, he's always famous for saying, you know, I didn't ski to the puck. I skied to where the puck was going to be, or skated to. And I think that, you know, what you're describing is you guys have, over time, created a completely integrated offering at a time when everyone was talking about open systems and, you know,
but he
10
was,
different vendors.
Let's separate me and Larry in this context. Larry was way out on this one. You know, Larry just didn't call it cloud.
Right.
Larry called it software over the internet. Doesn't sound as fun. Cloud sounds better. But when he invented NetSuite, which we're going way back now.
Yeah.
This was accounting, standard accounting to small and medium businesses over the internet years ago. First investor in Salesforce.com.
Yeah. And Zach Nelson and Mark Benioff are Oracle guys.
You got all Oracle guys.
Yeah. So that DNA has been spread, and here's the parent ship, the mothership. And I think that model, I mean, I'm not making this up, I think that model is back again. So we're as a large-scale trend, I think we're moving from a time where 5 years ago or more, it was all about open systems, and I'll buy one from this guy
Scale
and one
out.
from that
It's
guy.
it's a procurement strategy.
And now, whether you want to call it the cloud or you want to call it a private cloud or whether you call it data, but somehow or other, the description you just gave of an integrated offering is where it's all moving.
I think there's going to be a cycle, and I think things move in cycles. Organizations centralize, they decentralize. Is it because one's right? No. They each have fragilities in all these models. I think in the vertically integrated model, that was a rebellion against the IBM model of the 80s.
Right.
People wanted to decouple all these piece parts because they thought they could get better leverage. They did. In the context of creating better leverage, they created more complexity.
Right.
Now that that complexity has been created, that complexity has to be eliminated and eradicated. So cycling back towards higher levels of integration. And I do believe this cloud and the engineered system thing is the same thing, whether it's a private cloud, any sort of open cloud, whether it's an on-premise secured application, it's all going to be about how I push the complexity and the cost back into the industry instead of keeping it on my P&L. Because I'm a business. I got other things I want to go spend my time on than, have guys looking around at the nanometer size of a chip.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else can do the work.
So I'm going to kind of do two jumps here for us. When you look at the consumer side of the world, clearly there's been a lot of energy in consumer since the smartphone, I guess. Kind of go back to the iPad. Not that that's diminishing in any way, but it seems to me that there's new energy coming back to the enterprise market. Does it feel like that to you?
New energy. Listen, I think the problem you got in the enterprise market relates to the consumer market.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to pull this computer out. I call it a computer. This thing, if you pull it apart, I'm trying to look at the crowd. I don't know how many people are as old as us. But this is more powerful than a 360 mainframe.
That's what I learned that.
Right? So you got 2 billion, we talk about 5 billion wireless phones, but there are 2 billion computers now, smartphones, mainframes of circa 1984, 1983, in people's hands running around the planet. The data on the planet has grown, 7, 8x since 2005. That's 2005 through 2012. Forecast is between 2012 and 2020 that this current baseline grows 20x, driven by all sorts of unstructured data, video from police cameras, data coming off rigs, all this big data stuff you hear about now.
Craig better.
Lots of data, genomic, all kinds of reasons why now the data set size is growing. So now you got 2 billion mainframes going against what'll be 65, 70 zettabytes worth of data, zettabyte, terabyte, petabyte, exabyte, zettabyte, lots of data, let me put it that way. 2 billion computers, and I think the problem in companies, Mark, is that the apps are 23 years old. Mm-hmm. Again, as I mentioned earlier, and the bigger problem is that Mark, we're trained, given our age, to take crummy service. I mean, I'm used, listen, I get thrilled when I can if somebody told me I can get gate information on a computer, this is great. I find this fabulous. I don't actually believe it. My kids expect it. Mm-hmm. My kids expect to get anything they want, whenever they want, from whoever they want, instantly, against 65 zettabytes of data, carrying a mainframe in their hand. And they don't know anything about it. I tell my daughter, hard to get data because some of these applications are legacy applications. My daughter, what's a legacy application? Yeah. Well, it's an old piece of code. She goes, well, don't they have a search engine?
Do you think the cloud is a transitional step that solves this problem? Do you leave the COBOL installed base, jump to the cloud, then come back later with some new language?
Let me stay away from the technical part of the cloud. I think the technical part of the cloud will become very interesting in the context of not just the technology, but the levels of integration you can achieve and the service levels you can achieve.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be very positive. I think the bigger issue with the cloud will be the point I described earlier. It's a business issue more than a technical issue. Mm-hmm. Technical issue I don't think will be an issue at all. There are several business issues. So for example, I had a guy at some newspaper, I won't name it, tell me, hey, there's going to be 450 of these cloud vendors that all provide boutique solutions to companies. It's going to be tough for you guys. And actually, really, you think that's how it's going to work? You think a CEO or CFO is going to go run around and say, let's have 450 separate providers of stuff that doesn't work together? And how's it going to work? How are you going to close the books? How are you going to deal with Sarbox? So this is going to have a much to do about standard process. Are you going to have a suite of capabilities in the cloud? How are you going to hook accounting to supply chain, to procurement, to HR? How are you going to get all this lined up together? The technology, Mark, this is going to go. I mean, there's going to be no issue, I think, in the end. I think you'll have issues with security for a while, concerns, let me put it that way, issues. But we can solve those with firewalls and private clouds.
So you're anticipating my next question, because I want to go to private clouds with you on that. So, and I recognize the word cloud is a bit ambiguous here. So, and I think that you have a specific definition. Is that a true statement? You want to do that?
Well, no,
when you look at a cloud, what's a cloud? What does Oracle see as a cloud?
Yeah, that's my question. But I mean, I think, again, the way we define the cloud is a set of capabilities that we can deliver to you from a remote location that lets us serve up the intellectual property to you. And we can do that outside your firewall, secure it, inside your firewall. And frankly, I think the key for the future of IP is we can use the same IP on premise. So we're trying to eliminate a decision that says, once you fly into a cloud, you can't fly out. Mm-hmm. We want you to get into an open environment where the same code can be on premise. You can build a private cloud, typically defined as behind your firewall.
Yeah, I'm seeing two benefits here. One is the escape from the COBOL jungle, or the COBOL capture, or whatever you want to call it, the 23-year-old application. And then going back, what you just described, having the same new technology available wherever you go, inside and outside. So now I'm going to private cloud. So
let me go one quick question.
Yeah.
I think one thing, don't dismiss, Mark, the complexity around application consolidation and the change of applications is really hard. This is not really fundamentally an IT question. Mm-hmm. It's every bit a business question as much as an IT question. I mean, I've told the story before. I mean, at HP in 2005, I mean, we had 7,000 applications running the place. And you get 7,000 applications just by definition before you start. You know, our IT budget was higher than our R&D budget. And our number of humans in IT exceeded the number of humans in our sales force. And you say, well, how did it get there? It got there because of the application sprawl. And when you then try to go at applications, if you tell a bunch of IT guys, hey, I have a really big idea, let's shrink the number of applications. All the IT guys nod. But if you let the IT guys run their plays, what are they going to do? They're going to consolidate data centers. They're going to consolidate servers. They're going to look for ways to virtualize those servers. That's only a small piece of the issue. The issue is, I'll give you one business process issue. We distribute a lot of parts. Computer would break. We'd have to show up with a part to fix the computer. 1.8 million parts a year. We found 100 different applications to distribute the 1.8 million parts. And you'd have business guys explain to you these little deltas in process that required an individual application. And eventually you got to tell those business guys, stop. Just stop, or we're going to get new guys. Because we have to get this thing brought together. And all of a sudden, when you tell the business people, you need to justify to me why we need 99 incremental apps, nobody shows up. And 100 apps turn to one. And if you do that process by process by process, IT gets materially simpler. Then when you run the other plays that IT runs, so I don't want to dismiss when you get to this cloud subject, it's not the cloud in isolation is not the answer. The answer is leadership. Leadership aligned to business strategy, to process, eventually to the application. And I think the technology and the simplification we can provide with engineered systems, the alignment of engineered systems to the cloud, private or otherwise, we can deliver on a huge promise here. But it's got to have all these elements.
This sounds an awful lot like the trend on the consumer side, where increasingly it's the customer who's driving the train. And it sounds like on the enterprise side, a very long cycle, but one in which increasingly the customer is driving the train, where their requests, their needs, their requirement for speed, their requirement for integration will be the primary driver in how the whole system is designed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it in consumer. I mean, you know, this is an integrated experience, right? And this is an integrated experience, further integrated if I integrate it with an iPad. If I integrate it with an iPad and the Mac, it's yet a further integrated experience. And to the degree it can be integrated for me and tested for me, it's actually an integrated, simpler experience. And I think it's the same trend you see through everything we touch, this thing where you leave it to average humans to integrate all this stuff. By definition, you're going to have
Spaghetti.
some level of fragility that comes out of that.
So let's go to the private cloud for a minute. What is that?
Well, typically, it's defined as being behind a firewall. So typically, it doesn't change the architecture. It doesn't change anything physical in the computer.
Whose firewall?
Well, I think in most cases, typically you're going to find with banks, and there's actually regulatory definition now around this in some countries and in some industries, that if you're in a banking industry, you know, you literally can't have your data get outside the firewall, your firewall being defined as the bank. And so I think this sort of requirement of security, and then we could get into security, we could be up here for a lot longer than what this clock says, talking about the security issues that come along. Listen, security is a tough issue. It is at the heart of why this private-public cloud debate continues to go on. Listen, attacks are going to keep coming. The bad guy gets more sophisticated. It's like the crook who shows up at your house. He goes up and tries to open the door. It's locked. They typically don't turn around and leave. They try to innovate. They go through a window. They go through a back door. They go through a chimney. They do some other thing to innovate. Same thing in our world. So I don't think that's gonna slow down. I think most of the attack. By the way, while I'm on it, I asked our CTO. I gave him this thing for kicks. Did I tell you this story?
No.
I gave him my phone. I said, listen, hack this.
iPhone. Yeah.
I don't want to call out the brand, but it's iPhone. Yeah, thanks. Go hack this. And by the way, I want you to time it. So he and another guy got together a little under 4 minutes, and he had my mail.
Yeah.
And that's bad news for me, because in my mail is the stuff that the quiet period says we don't want to talk about up here. And so, you know, this whole issue, which gets complicated now, because if you're in IT and you're in corporate IT, I want to get more capabilities into these tools. I got consumers coming out of school that want iPhones, they want iPad, they want a mobile strategy, and they want access to their data, they want access to their work. The more I push that out from the edge, by definition, the less secure it becomes. And if somebody hacked your iPhone, how do I know who you are once you come through the iPhone? So there's a ton of these issues, Mark, that come along with this. But your point about a private cloud, typically behind the firewall. I think it's more complicated than just behind the firewall, just based on the one example I gave you. You've got a ton of users, incredibly mobile. They want their data. What are you going to do to protect it?
Now, I know you've just arrived here in the building, but we've this morning gone through the international scene of IP attack by nations. We've had the CIA with us talking about security issues and how they see the world. We've had security experts talking about exactly what you just mentioned, Apple versus RIM and other makers, and the security delta between those universes. And I think your presence here gives us a chance to talk about the amalgamation of all those things. So despite the fact that security is complicated, I want to ask you a question about it, which is, you've just laid out exactly the problem, I think. So if I'm a nation and I want to get HP's crown jewels, I'd love to go through.
I don't know about their crown jewels anymore. I'm more worried about Oracle's right now.
No, I'm talking about Oracle.
Oh, wait. Oh, yes. Okay. Good.
That's exactly what I'm after, right? I'd like to create a new Oracle twice as big as you in 2 weeks. How will I do? Well, I think I'd just go make a copy of everything you've got.
Well,
and if I happen to know that you have an
before.
Apple iPhone.
We've had that happen before. You know, I mean, remember, you know, Larry tells a story. I'm gonna quote a story Larry told that about, where is Judy in the room somewhere? How many years ago did that attack hit Oracle? The one in Texas, 5 years ago, 6 years, some time ago. We had our servers got invaded. They called Larry. say, we've been attacked. First reaction, being attacked by the Chinese. The Chinese have attacked Oracle. Bad news. More work done. Find out it's not coming from China, it's coming from Texas. Bad news, the Chinese have gone to Texas and now they're attacking Oracle. A little more work. It's not the Chinese, it's actually guys in Texas. And they're down in College Station or Bryan, Texas, and worse yet, they're not from Texas A&M. They're from a company called Tomorrow Now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And they literally came in to take all the Oracle code and steal it and use it. And of course, to the point, you gotta protect it. And so these attacks, and obviously you learn a heck of a lesson.
Big court case.
Big court case that eventually got people pleading guilty and all kinds of issues that came up out of that, and I won't go into that right now. But again, you start seeing these attacks that are coming on companies. We've had the experience of what it's like when your core IP, to your point, is at risk. I'm going to do no work. Someone's attacked you, and they're going to take your IP and use it to effectively ruin your company.
Right.
So big issue to protect that IP. I do think on the point you're bringing up, that the more you let this IP move from the center, we can do a great job securing a database. I've given you an example of an external hit. Frankly, most of the attacks are not external, they're internal. So when you go look at the data, if you want to get your financial results from a company, you'd be better not to ask Mark about Oracle's results. You'd be better to ask the DBA. The database administrator sees the results before I do. So the reality is, if you want to protect data, you have to have your internal systems, your internal processes aligned just as well as you do external. And the farther from the database you get, the more at risk you get.
We've actually been conducting some meetings around the world on this exact question of what the topology of a future network is to be most secure, and where do you put the crown jewels. And according to what you're saying, it's the same answer, which is you put them right in the middle. You may even unplug them or so reduce the policy about how many people have access to that stuff that you can actually control it and make a better job of evaluating those people on an annual basis or a quarterly basis. Because what you're saying is absolutely true. We've seen Ford's with this. Ford's had this problem. A lot of people had the problem. Motorola obviously had that problem. So the employees become the weak link sometimes, or people inside who have access, or disgruntled employees, all that stuff. Having said all of that, if you're outside, if we're back for a minute for looking at, let's say I'm GE and I want to decide about public versus private and all this business. And I've got all these people coming in the door every morning with iPhones and whatever phones they happen to buy that morning at AT&T. There is this countervailing trend now between this BYOD thing and the idea of the security problems you and I are talking about. And I don't see a lot of activity on that yet. It seems as though CEOs...
I think there is a lot of activity.
Is there?
I think there is.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I think people are bringing their own devices. I think it's a reality of what's going to happen. I think as you have kids come into
How do you
the
secure
workplace.
it?
Well, I think there's various mechanisms. I think you can secure, you can create, for lack of a better idea, partitions even in a device and secure those partitions. You can secure those all the way back to the original origin of the data, and if you will, almost create a secure capability within a device and make that incrementally harder.
Did you say
to get
almost?
at. The problem is with anytime you deal with security, I've trained myself well to never use absolutes.
Yes.
And so whenever I say to a customer, I know we can make you more secure. You can never commit. It's like the intelligence business, right? When you say, listen, I'm guaranteeing you everything's okay. And nobody can guarantee us that. And what they can do is continually to make us more secure.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing in our business. We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars per year just in securing databases, securing applications, and securing tools. And what we do is, while we're not in the consumer business, we're not about to make an Oracle phone. It's not where we're working. Judy, we're not working on that. You haven't heard that? Okay, yeah, I don't think we're working on it. At least I don't know about it. So, but what we do is make sure all of our apps are iPhone, iPad, mobile ready. And so therefore, we're in the consumer business whether we like it or not, because our job is to make our capabilities as easy to use as we possibly can while we make them secure. But make no mistake, these are countering forces
That's the whole point, yeah.
at play, right? As you start to put IP out in a broad way to people with the power of a mainframe, 2 billion of them, going to 3 billion of them, and you want to get them all kinds of interesting data, you correspondingly increase your profile risk or your risk. So it's how the world works, Mark.
When a company looks at the what we're calling a private cloud, whether it's inside their firewall, in their building, I see there's some effort by cloud salespeople to identify these two different categories and say, you're going to be okay in we'll have a private cloud for you, not the public cloud we're selling to everybody else. And it strikes me that what you're offering, in a sense, is the other way of doing that, where you say, well, you can have some equipment of ours on premise, and if you wanted to keep your crown jewels there, go ahead, and you can have some of the stuff that we'll provide as software as a service to you, and it's the same IP, the same technology, so that it'll work for you either way.
Right.
So there's a seamless cross blood-brain barrier situation there, and you can decide what to put where.
You got it. I mean, I think again, the way our head works is let's take the issue of private, public, on-premise off the table. Let's choose based on the IP. Choose based on the process, choose based on the IP. Then you decide what makes sense on-premise. You decide what makes sense private cloud. You make sense what you want from the Oracle Secure Cloud. And we'll serve it up to you any way you want. Now, also with our cloud, the Oracle Cloud, you can go from our cloud to the Amazon cloud and then come back to the Oracle Cloud. Our cloud's open. You fly into our cloud, you can fly out. I'd be aware of these clouds that you fly into and you just can't fly out because it's a proprietary cloud. So I think our view is take this dialogue off the table, focus on the IP, then we'll have a separate discussion of the best way to serve that IP up in the context of what you want to do. It could be different by region. You've got banks that have a different view in the U.S. versus what they do in Singapore. Singapore's a heavy regulatory environment. What you can do, there's some countries you can't take data out of a country. They actually tell you the architecture or at least the type of requirements that lead you to an architectural conclusion. Again, we want to take that argument off the table too, so that we can help the customer basically just do it the way that optimizes their business and get the cloud versus non-cloud versus private cloud versus public cloud versus semi-cloud versus sort of cloud off the table and do it the way that best optimizes for the customer.
And that fits, I think you're alluding to, in some way, to the privacy requirements that nations have started to impose regarding, for a variety of reasons, regarding social networks and so on, and where the servers reside.
Yeah. Listen, it's scary stuff. I mean, I won't mention the name of the company, but I'd never heard of a company before until I got like 6 emails in one day from my bank, hotel company, that basically told me their provider had been breached and my data was now in the hands of bad guys. And, it doesn't take but one incident like that to get to get the kind of attention that you get around some of these issues.
Right. So let's take all the stuff we've just talked about, and I want to kind of run you forward 5 years and ask you what you see. I mean, obviously we're talking about what you're offering today. What are these guys going to see from, not just from Oracle, but in the whole industry 5 years from now? What's the landscape look like?
I don't know. I'm not good. I've never been good on these time frames. Everything I always tell you will happen happens slower than I think.
Yeah.
But I do think there'll be a forcing factor that's economically driven that forces companies to completely redo their application suite.
Is security pressure part of that?
Security, newness of the application, flexibility of the application, separation of application and data. I mean, there's a whole set of requirements that I think are going to change that application infrastructure. Performance. So, just start with something as simple as take the existing code bases we have today. They just simply don't run fast enough for all the data that's going to be on the plant. So the data set problem by itself, you start getting to big data. I mean, I'm sure you've heard tons of big data examples today. Whether you're trying to in real time look at video cameras in London, whether you've got real-time monitors on every oil rig in the world, looking at every piece part second by second, trying to predict any failures that might occur. These have huge data requirements, therefore have huge performance requirements. You got a performance problem, you got a flexibility of the app problem, you got mobility issues, you got security issues. I think whether it's 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, this application set has to come out and a new set has to come in, while simultaneously you have to change the game from the customer, am doing the work and the provisioning, to the industry's doing materially more of that for me. And I think that's really hard work, because while I tell you about these applications, it'd be really nice if these applications were all packaged. The problem with the world's, let's take US, the US's core application suite, 25% of those, roughly speaking, are defined as packaged apps. 75 are not, 75%. Of the 75%, 50% of the 75% started out as a packaged app and got customized by the buyer in such a way that the originator of the IP can't recognize it, and therefore can't support it or can't give it updates. So therefore, that becomes a huge issue, and the speed. If you tell me...
We call that the Android operating system, by the way.
That's a different subject we can't get into here for us because of Java. But that said, if you got into how fast this will go, I think it's governed by the speed of CEOs strategically looking to realign how they run their business, the implications on budgets, the implication on standard processes. If you tell me that goes, and I think that'll, again, be a governor on the success of many of the brands out in the marketplace today, because without the application suites that surround your business processes, the ability to do business obviously becomes very challenging versus some of the new startups that are out there.
Right. So in this 5-year lookout or 10-year lookout, whatever the number is, tell me what you see. What are you seeing? What's
I can imagine a world. I can imagine a world where all apps. I mean, that's too strong. Many apps in the time frame we're talking about are served up through a cloud architecture, integrated into pre-provisioned engineered systems, and that you have the ability where these systems are pre-provisioned. And then I think actually the location of the computer, on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, is an irrelevant dialogue. It becomes relevant at a point, but not for the sake of what we're talking about today. I think you'll see more vertical integration in the industry. I think you'll see a rebellion against this services modification play, and I don't mean that as a negative on services. There's lots of services to get from here to there, but as a company, you're going to see much more education about going standard and getting the cost out of IT. Again, $850 billion, almost over half of that. Think of that as $440 billion spent basically gluing things together and modifying core code bases. What's the opportunity to reinvest that money in a different way to get a different outcome? And I think you'll start to see that shift over the next several years. Today, we're talking about the embryonic beginning of it, which is cloud engineered systems. I think as you play that forward, this has a chance to be a dramatic change in the industry during our career horizons.
Right. And it strikes me the way you're describing it as though there were differential, I'm going to talk biology like Craig does, there are differential evolutionary pressures on the part that's out there in whatever kind of cloud you want to call it, and the part that's in-house. And so even if it's the same equipment, so maybe it's all Sun Oracle equipment and so on, but these pressures might be different here versus there. So that if we came back 10 years later and we looked at what's running on what and how it's being managed, there may be different worlds there, outside versus inside.
I'll just say it this way. I like our chances to do real well in the new world.
Yep.
So I'll just leave it that way. I think the bigger issue for us is getting the world moving that way. We're going to do great. Our IP stack is just second to none. I'm glad to have that debate at a separate time. We've been rewriting applications for the cloud for 6 years. Smartest guys in the world doing it. We've made tremendous acquisitions. I feel great about our position. That said, the bigger issue is the speed by which you see corporate world start moving to embrace the fact that things just have to change. And the people that change the fastest while doing it well are going to win.
Right.
And you got all kinds of issues, Mark, that are just so common. The issue of just simple multi-channel, the fact that I can go into a bank, I can go into a retailer, and they know me through one channel, but they don't know me through another. How does that get adjusted? And what are those applications are different for each of those channels? And they're old. and they're slow. And how do those get redone? And how fast can they get redone, and can they get redone against an architecture that can, anyway, lots of opportunity.
Yeah.
Lots of opportunity.
Yeah. So, and this brings me to something that you and I talked about at FiRe Global in Seattle, which is, do you see, we talked about Oracle as a platform, a global platform, and I don't know, it was probably obvious to a lot of folks already, but it struck me that there was kind of a transition happening where one goes from the original vision of being a database company, and then their database plus applications, data plus applications and services, and hardware, and at some point it's a platform. And I think you're probably there now. Does it feel like that?
I try to say it this way, Mark. We have 4 strategies in the company. One is to be best of breed at every level of our stack, which means if customers still want to buy a la carte, after all the discussion we had today, we will sell a la carte. And their customers are going to decide that that strategy makes sense for them. And my point is peace. We'll try to be best at OSs, databases, and if you choose to use our database in a different OS environment or a different app environment, we're going to participate with you in that and help you every way we can. Second, we try to take those best-of-breed parts and vertically integrate them into something that gives extreme total cost of ownership. We could take these engineered systems, comparing them to the a la carte systems, and in some cases run them 150 times faster. Report took you 150 minutes, now it takes you 1 minute. By the way, remember when you go 150 times faster, I gave you an engineering performance-oriented thing. You could make the argument it's 1/150th of the cost if you want the same performance. 2, engineer them together. Point 3, we're building out industries. So we want to solve these problems we're discussing in the context of industry business problems.
So you're going deeper into the verticals.
Deeper into verticals. Deeper into the merchandising problem, the e-commerce problem in retail, the billing problem in telecommunications, et cetera, et cetera. 4th, we're building a whole new suite of cloud applications. And I believe strategies 2 and 4, as I mentioned earlier, are the same continuum. Their issue of this, get the complexity out and give it to me. You know, I don't necessarily like to say it that way, but I take the complexity of integrating this stuff, testing it, warranting it, patching it, supporting it, running it, everything. And I think that's why you see the spirit you do. But those are the 4 things we're doing. You could make the argument, you use different words than I'd use, but in some context, some of these ecosystems become platforms. And I do think that is a natural evolution of the industry.
I think if I skip near number 2, 1, 3, and 4 make a great platform. So, okay. And following along on that same kind of vision, looking forward, and with all the stuff wrapped up, plus your 10-year view, I want to put words in your mouth, but when you look at the competitive landscape and the other players who are there today and who may be arriving, new emerging, exciting young companies, startups, and a lot of those, but is there a general consolidation that's happening because of the pressures we're talking about? Will there be fewer, larger platform-like companies 5 years from now?
You know, listen, I think if the industry grows the way I described, by definition, there'll be more consolidation. You know, if you get an industry that in corporate world grows a couple of 3, maybe it'll grow 4 or 5 points, I think that'd be great. Now, obviously, that's going to mean companies have to go take share if they want to grow exponentially in those type of markets. Now, you'll see more growth in some emerging markets and so forth, but I do think with the successful companies, you know, you take us. I mean, I didn't call the bank this morning, but my guess is we have $30 billion in the bank. Could be a little more. Could
I
be
didn't
a little
call
less.
my bank either.
Yeah. And that's not my bank account. I want to make sure that's Historical's bank account. And so by definition, when you make our margins and you make our interest rate on our cash, it's better to invest it in the business than to keep it you know, in the bank. If, in fact, I want to make sure I'm not making any forward-looking M&A statements. Please don't write that down. All I'm saying is that you would invest that back into your business if you thought things made sense. And again, I'm making no forward-looking statement other than to say there will be, and there's other companies like us that are in a position where they will look to consolidate. Now, I say all that against a backdrop of we're an industry that has consolidated.
Right.
So when you go talk about, hey, I always love the speeches when somebody says, oh, we'll just do some M&A and buy some companies. Who? Because the list of companies to go buy is smaller than it's ever been. So yeah, I think there'll be consolidation. I think there's likely to see some consolidation into these vertically integrated platforms that you call them, that can deliver a higher level of IP service capability than ever before. Now I say that there may be very well minimal M&A in the context of, you see some of the M&A activity, but if you look at the dollars, the size of the companies, they're actually smaller, which I think is a sign of a industry that not only is consolidating, but frankly has been consolidating.
Yeah. Well, there are all kinds of financial reasons why that ought to happen too. I mean, you just make the money work better. Without talking about anything near term, looking at the long-term general competitive planet Earth situation, and looking at your history, I think in terms of your whole career, people look at you and they think this guy is an acquisitions able guy. It's part of his tool chest. It's part of his weapon system. And I'm assuming, we've already seen that happen at HP. We've already seen that happen at Oracle. And I assume that that's in your mind somewhere.
I would make no statement about M&A. Listen, we just, as it relates to M&A, we evaluate each situation independently and make decisions if they make sense. I think, again, when you look at our history, since I've been at Oracle, I think we've done tremendous. We buy leaders in their industries. We bought a company called Taleo that was the leader in recruiting. 15-20% of all U.S. resumes just bought them. Yeah. We bought a company called Right Now that's the leader in business to consumer.
Just launched a new Right Now product.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we continue to try to buy leaders, but we typically buy them into white space pieces of our architecture where we add to our capabilities, but we add through bringing the best player in the game. And then it's very important for us to then integrate the technology. So, Mark, it's not as easy as just buying somebody. Right. We have to buy somebody that can leverage the Oracle stack, because everything we build now, this may be getting too much into detail here, but we build everything on the same middleware stack so that we can extend it and integrate it at a level where these applications can now work together. I mentioned earlier as a suite of capabilities as opposed to siloed.
Well, you're anticipating my next question. You're kind of reading my mind, because you were talking about going deeper and deeper into these verticals. But in making these acquisitions, obviously to have the IP pay off the best way it can, you want to do what you're just saying, right? You want to have this available to every vertical
that's right,
that would normally want to.
And it's work. I mean, so for us, all of our industry groups are now taking their apps and integrating them on Exadata and Exalogic, which allows them to run faster and so forth. But many of the companies we bought had their own middleware products, believe it or not.
Right.
And so now, as we bring these new generation of apps out, they're all built with the same tools, on the same middleware. Not only does it help us integrate, our productivity is so much higher.
Yep.
Because customers want this stuff to work together. We always have the issue of, I promise you, when we buy something, it won't be 24 hours where somebody says, why doesn't this work with the rest of the stuff? Well, it didn't work 48 hours ago, and so it'll take a little longer. But that certainly is our strategy.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up, I think there's a holistic integration going on here on every level. We started out with a level of the company itself. We've gone through inside the firewall, outside of the firewall. You described this kind of deeper, wider, ongoing series of acquisitions and divings into vertical markets, all of which have to work with the same kind of languages and technology, cross-platform. When you put that into one big picture, it is the most integrated effort to do this that I've seen. Is that a fair statement?
I'll speak for us, right? It's a lot of work, but I mean, we can do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do it. We've got we've got it. We've had this strategy now for a while. I think Larry's been on this for a while. This is a new idea. I think the integration of Sun has helped. Some of the acquisitions has helped. Java's acquisition has helped. The alignment and the maturity of Fusion middleware becoming the #1 middleware in the industry has helped. And so as a result, I'm not trying to tell you everything's always going to be perfect day one, but strategically, I think our confidence level is very high. We're doing the right things. It'll always be measured in the end by our execution. And we feel good about our ability to go execute.
Right. Well, I do too. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Thank you all.
And I'll just note, for the same reasons we described at the beginning, we couldn't do Q&A for this talk, but we would normally have done that, but we're not able to for legal reasons.